Welcome back to Understanding Laudato Si. We now begin taking a look at the very last chapter of the encyclical, chapter 6. This chapter can be summarized really well by the opening line that Pope Francis presents to us, in which he says that many things have to change course, but it is we human beings, above all, who need to change. This is the sentiment that kind of is present throughout, that kind of is the thread that unites 9 very different subsections. Here in this last chapter, Pope Francis is concerned primarily about change of individual attitudes and perspectives, changes in terms of more cultural shifts, changes in terms of communal identity and prioritization. But he's also interested in highlighting some of the ways in which the Christian theological tradition carries onward this call to change, this call toward what he calls throughout the encyclical ecological conversion. In this episode, we'll take a look at the first 4 of these subsections, and in the next and final episode, we'll take a look at the remaining 5. The first subsection Pope Francis names is called Toward a New Lifestyle. And here he reiterates something that has been present at various points throughout the encyclical, and that's this sort of omnipresent notion of consumerism, this culture that we face on a daily basis that is so deeply seated in our own kind of experience, the shaping of our own desires, that it's hard at times to recognize when it's operative, which in a society like ours in North America, particularly in the United States, this is something that is completely saturated our identity as a society, as a culture. Pope Francis says that we need to move away from this sort of impulsive sense of consumerism, this need to buy more or acquire new things, or to amass a variety of properties, amass wealth, amass land, and the like. Instead, we need to move away from that. And this is what he means when he talks about a new lifestyle, that there is a real sense of conversion or turning away from this pervasive consumerism toward a simpler lifestyle, another way of living. He also says that when we make choices about our purchases, when we make decisions about what we would buy and how we'll spend our money, how we engage in economic decisions, Pope Francis says this is never simply an economic or strategic or political decision. It's not an act reserved only in terms of finances, but every purchase, every economic choice is always a moral decision. There's an element of an ethical consideration that we must take, as part of our decision-making process, and so very often we don't. You've heard, of course, about campaigns against child labor or slave labor or fair work environments. You've heard of a variety of other sort of calls to boycott or to purchase one product over another given a company's practices and reputation and the like. Well, Pope Francis says that we need to be more mindful in all of our purchasing about the ways in which our decisions on the economic level and financial level impact the rest of creation, the rest of the environment. Pope Francis, in naming this shift toward a new lifestyle, is in a sense echoing the work of liberation theologians from Latin America who in the late 1960s and 1970s through today have identified the need for us to experience this lifelong movement of conversion toward solidarity, particularly solidarity with the poorest of the poor, our sisters and brothers who are most vulnerable and at the margins. But in this shift toward a new lifestyle, Pope Francis is including in this hearing the cry of the poor and this call toward solidarity with our sisters and brothers of the human family, a consideration of our sisters and brothers in the family of creation more broadly conceived. How is it that our lifestyle takes into consideration in a serious way what we might call a preferential option, not just for the poor of the human family, but for the rest of creation and, in fact, the whole earth? Though there are lots of reasons to be discouraged, Pope Francis points to the Earth Charter as an example of a pathway, as an illustration of how we can change, how human beings can shift our lifestyles, shift our perspectives and our priorities, and he encourages us to do so, that we should be people of hope, people who are ready to take up the task of Christian conversion, to care for the rest of creation and one another. The The second section in this chapter is titled Educating for the Covenant Between Humanity and the Environment. And here, Pope Francis is concerned again with this shift, this impetus to change, that we need to change not just the way that we live in terms of our lifestyle and our purchasing decisions, but we have to change the way that we think. And the way that that happens, first and foremost, is through education. We need to inform ourselves as well as the next generation of the members of our human family of all the factors, all the scientific concerns, all the realities of the world around us, particularly with an eye toward the environment and how we are called to care for the rest of creation. Pope Francis says that it's not just a call in terms of education to broadening the information that we are exposed to or the knowledge that we have on an intellectual level alone. He says that this broadening of a horizon of information in our intellect should also broaden the horizon of our spiritual lives, that the experience of changing our lifestyles and the experience of educating one another and the next generation in terms of care for creation and care for the poor is a pedagogy that is also a spiritual pedagogy. It's a way of opening oneself up to what Pope Francis calls the transcendent, the divine mystery, the God beyond us, who is also at the same time very near to us and the rest of creation. In what way, in our discussions, in our education, in our conversation about the environment, about ecology, about care for the earth, do we include this openness toward transcendence, our experience of the divine in this world around us? This is a key element for Pope Francis and something we should keep in mind as we move forward in this experience of conversion. Pope Francis says that education takes place in many different locations and according to many different ways, in schools, through the media, in news, in our churches. But he also says that one of the key places in which education takes place is within the family. And he prioritizes, in a way, the family and the pedagogical significance of parents as first teachers, as family members, as co-learners or educators in this experience of ecological conversion and spiritual growth. Speaking of ecological conversion, this is the title of the third section of this chapter. Here, Pope Francis calls for what he names an ecological spirituality that is rooted in our faith and in the gospel convictions that we are to care for one another and at the same time care for the rest of creation. Here he returns to the great example of St. Francis of Assisi, the one from whom he got his name as Bishop of Rome, Pope Francis, and the one who he gets the title of this encyclical, Laudato Si, from. St. Francis, is a constant presence throughout this encyclical, but it's here at the end, as in the beginning of the encyclical, that Pope Francis really raises St. Francis up as an exemplar, as a model of what it means to experience this conversion to the environment, this ecological conversion. What's interesting about the way Pope Francis situates St. Francis of Assisi's conversion in an ecological or environmental sense is that he places it within the broader experience of Christian conversion. It's not just out of the blue that St. Francis of Assisi begins to be aware of his relationship and the interdependence of all of creation on one another, but rather it's in his growing experience of his relationship with God, with other human beings, and eventually the whole of creation that his eyes are opened, the veil is lifted, and he's able to see this deep kinship, this cosmic family of creation, we might say, in which he is a part. And Pope Francis says St. Francis shows us a way, an example, a model, and a clue to what it's like to have this experience of ongoing ecological conversion. While individual conversion, the conversion of each particular Christian on their journey of faith, is important, Pope Francis also says that there's a need for communal or collective conversion, that we as a group, we as members of a society and as a church, members of other institutions and the like, have to shift our collective understandings, the way that we relate to one another and relate to the rest of creation. We need to shift our community networks, he says, in this particular way to address what we might call structural sin, the ways in which our institutions, our ways of going about the world, the ways in which we structure our decision-making and electoral processes and the like can contribute to environmental degradation. It can contribute to the oppression and marginalization of the poor and others. And these things have to shift not just on the individual level, although that is key, it's essential and important, but it has to shift collectively, communally as well. The fourth section, Pope Francis titles Joy and Peace. It's in this section that we start to get a glimpse at the future. We get a glimpse at the horizon, the edge of that horizon that we should keep our eyes on in this experience of ecological conversion through the process of education, through the process of moving closer to in solidarity to the poor and to the rest of creation with a new lifestyle. What he says is that we so often live in this busy, hectic, crazy world in which we are distracted and discouraged from being in the present moment. And he says that this is one way in which we need to open our eyes, we need to shift our lives. He says at one point that we need to be serenely present to each reality as we experience it, as little, as small as it may be, to see the world before us and the world around us, to recognize our shared humanity with our brothers and sisters, but also to recognize our shared creationality with all aspects of creation. In this spirit, we should become more attuned to the fact that, like other creatures, other aspects of our family of creation, that we too are called to live simply. We're called in our experience of ecological conversion to not be upset about all the things that our consumeristic society tells us that we should acquire, the latest and the greatest of this or that, or more and more of such a thing. Instead, we should be content with those things that are necessary for human flourishing, and that we should work to make sure that all people are attended to and cared for in our society. In the spirit of this call for ecological conversion, Pope Francis identifies something of an aesthetic conversion or openness as well. In this, he's pointing to the beauty of creation and God's grace found within it. He says that in being attentive, being serenely present to the moment before us, we can celebrate not only the great giftedness of humanity and creation, but the wonderful gifts that God has given us in the forms of music and art, in the forms of the beauty of the world around us, and in the forms of nature, spending time within it, as well as spending time in prayer with God. We have to set time aside, time apart, in order to experience this aesthetic conversion, this experience of the beauty of God's creation around us. Not only does Pope Francis call for this conversion individually and collectively in terms of a new way of relating to one another, but in the spirit of this joy and peace about which he speaks, he highlights the fact that we need to find peace within ourselves as well. That so much of the discord, so much of our consumeristic drive, so much of the way that we interact with one another in destructive, violent, or dismissive ways is rooted in the lack of peace that we have within our own hearts. And for this, Pope Francis says we need to take time again aside to step back, to renew ourselves, to deepen our relationship with God, to come to peace within our own selves, within our own hearts, and that will open us up to others and to the world around us, and ultimately to God in the process. Finally, Pope Francis ends this section with an encouragement for all people to return to praying grace before meals. It's a simple thing. It's a little thing if we're very honest about it. And he doesn't call for necessarily a big production or a big show, but rather he invites us to reflect on and consider, do we, in the process of eating, in the process of nourishing ourselves and one another, in the process of preparing our food and meals, do we consider our interconnectedness? Are we aware of the gifts that God has given us, our dependence on God? Are we aware of the service of those who have made this meal, have made this food and our nourishment possible? And are we drawn to renewed solidarity with the sisters and brothers in our society who may be going without food in a given moment? Pope Francis says that praying grace before meals encourages us to be mindful of these things. And I would add to it, and Pope Francis doesn't mention this as explicitly, though I think he would agree, that we could, in addition to giving thanks to God, not only for the great gifts from God and for the service of those who've prepared the meals for us and the like, but we can also give thanks to God for the gift of the lives of the animals and plants that we consume. In a sense, in a very real sense, they who are also loved into existence by God have sacrificed, in a way, their own lives to nourish our lives. And so there's a great responsibility that we have as consumers, as fellow human beings, fellow creatures in this world, of eating mindfully, of being grateful for the nourishment that we receive, but also being attentive to the gift and to be good stewards of that gift that has been given to us in the lives of plants and animals that upon which we depend for our own lives. In the next and final episode, we'll take a look at the remainder of chapter 6. As always, I thank you for watching and encourage you to subscribe to this channel, to share these videos with others. If you have comments, questions, observations, or suggestions, I encourage you to place those in the comment section below. And as always, may the Lord give you peace.